Hello, it's your friend Doublebite, and here we are with my more in-depth, but hopefully relatively spoiler-free review. So, my biggest concerns going into this were, one, the trailers looked terrible, they looked too whimsical, they were really heavy on the comedy, and the series is called A Series of Unfortunate Events. It's supposed to be bleak. And honestly, it is more comedic than I was expecting, but it works. Neil Patrick Harris manages to hit this really sweet spot where he plays Count Olaf as kind of a buffoon, but still consistently threatening. It's almost like you still constantly expect he's so over the top, yet still has this menace to him. And you can kind of compare that to the henchmen. The henchmen are definitely comic relief in a sense. They're still threatening, but they don't have this level of malice. They're all really good though. I thought they were really well portrayed. They especially handled the hench person of indeterminate gender really well. I was kind of nervous about that, but they are adorable and they get some great lines. Apparently the actor is really adorable too. I read a couple of interviews and yeah, they seem like a sweetie. But yeah, so Count Olaf, Neil Patrick Harris's Count Olaf was definitely not what I was expecting, but is really good. Like, everything, even the stuff that's played for laughs, is done to accentuate his terribleness, and not just to accentuate his goofiness. So that's the best way of saying it. As far as other casting choices, I've said this in my 60-second review, but I want to go in a little more detail. Patrick Warburton, I just could not see as Lemony Snicket. And again, in the trailers... Okay, going back a little bit. The trailers really hyped the, oh, you shouldn't watch the show angle. And the first 15-20 minutes of this definitely push heavily on that, I feel. I feel like the pacing is a little awkward. The theme song is all about how you shouldn't watch the show. Like, I get that it's a shtick, but it didn't really work for me at the level that they were doing it. I'm glad I stuck with it after the first 15 minutes because the rest of it was really, really good. But going back, Warburton nails. Excuse me. He's like has this soulfulness to him, and the way they portray him as a narrator is really cool because he's half in scene, half out of scene. Other characters don't interact with him, but he feels like a physical presence. He's never a voiceover narrator. And you can tell that he's got his own stuff going on. So, overall, plot-wise, it's pretty faithful. It's like faithful plus plus. The parts from the books are pretty faithful in terms of plot. Oh, I got a sneeze coming. 1 second. So, in terms of like the plot, they're very faithful in some ways. They expand on some things in a way that feels good. In a way that feels like the books are kind of like Alice in Wonderland. They have a lot of wordplay, they have a lot of concept, but the plot can be a little thin. They're about atmosphere and wordplay, and also more than not Alice in Wonderland, they are about mystery. And the show chooses to make the plot a little fuller and bring some of the mystery of the series more front and center. I think it's a good decision. Like, I didn't finish the series, to be honest. I missed like the last 3 books, I think, or maybe 4 books, and that's when the mystery stuff really started to come to the forefront. If you've read the unauthorized autobiography, there's a lot more of that in the show, which I was kind of surprised by, but I actually thought worked. Especially because each book is getting its own hour and a half. So that would have felt kind of weird to not have some of that. And especially since it's Netflix, they're prepared for people to binge watch it. It feels like a really good decision. Again, there are changes to the book from the books, and there's probably a lot more than I realized. It's just that they're filling out the world rather than adding stuff to the world. Cinematography is pretty good. The set design is really good. Very exaggerated. It reminds me a little bit of early era Tim Burton, namely like Edward Scissorhands, where it's like, here's the gleaming, here's the dirty, here's the dark. The Baudelaire family is fine. I think they're doing a good job. They're definitely more subdued performance than the rest of the cast, but that works in a sort of way because they're fairly normal kids. Well, precocious kids, but relatively normal compared to this insane world that they're now in. And that's like the angle that the show is taking, that this is an insane world that they were not prepared for, even if they are in themselves ridiculous characters. I feel like they each have their more own personality more than in the books. As far as Violet and Klaus do, I feel like it's less she's the inventor one, he's the book one, but they actually have different outlooks on life more than in the books. Sunny they're handling pretty well, as far as like Sunny's kind of ridiculous in the book, and seeing a baby with that kind of biting power on screen is inherently kind of silly. Very silly, rather. So they do a decent job of that. Mr. Poe is delightfully odious. The casting of the other like major roles was good. I'm gonna go more into that in my spoilers review. But yeah, like, the show addressed a lot. The show addressed basically all of my shortcomings going into it. It's not a perfect show. I think your mileage may vary on if you think what they're doing is what they should be doing. I think like if you think Count Olaf is good, or if you think his performance is blasphemous, you know. I could see people going either way. So I highly recommend it. Check it out for yourself. Stick through the first episode, even if you're not that fond of the beginning. But if you're not fond of the first episode, I don't think anything later in the series is going to change your mind. That's about it. Like I said in my 6-second review, I'd give the show overall 8 out of 10. Which is kind of like, if you're interested in shows, watch the show. It's doing interesting things. It's highly entertaining. If you're a fan of the book series, go in with a grain of salt. Be willing to accept the show on its own merits, rather than trying to judge it as a strict adaptation of a book series that would be really difficult to adapt. Like, I kind of introduced the Alice in Wonderland comparison earlier and then kind of forgot about it. The books are about wordplay more than plot, and about like tone more than plot, at least in some regards. I think more so than people realize through nostalgia glasses. And that makes it really hard to adapt without adding things, and I think the series really does flesh things out well. Anyway, hope this was insightful at all, and until next time, Double Bite out.